The moment my granddaughter, my darling Lily, held up the quilt I had spent a year of my life stitching for her, wrinkled her nose, and said, "This looks so cheap, Grandma." She wasn't just insulting a gift. She was signing the eviction notice for her own fairy tale wedding. Hi, everyone. It's so lovely to be with you all again. My name is Josephine, but please call me Grandma Josephine. I'm 76 years old, and I live in a quiet little corner of Virginia where the Blue Ridge Mountains are a constant, gentle presence on the horizon, and the fireflies in summer are so thick it looks like the stars have come down to visit. This is a story about a gift, a story about a house, and a story about a heart that I thought was broken, but it turned out was just sleeping. It's a secret I have kept from everyone, even my own son, Lily's father. He knows his daughter's wedding plans were abruptly changed, but he doesn't know the real reason. He doesn't know that the single sharpest pain of my life was also the catalyst for the most powerful decision I ever made. Telling it now feels like pulling an old dusty box from the attic. It's heavy, and I'm a little afraid of what's inside, but I know it's time to finally open it and let the light in. Before I do, if you could be so kind as to like this video and subscribe to our channel, it would truly warm my heart. Your support isn't just a number to me, it's a community. It's a circle of friends giving me the courage to finally stitch this last, most difficult piece of my story together. It all started, as the best things do, with my husband, Arthur. Oh, my Arthur. He was a history professor at the local college, a man who believed that everything and everyone had a story worth telling. He wasn't a man for grand, flashy gestures. His love was in the details. It was in the way he'd leave a book on my bedside table, open to a passage he knew I would love. It was in the way he could sit on our porch for an hour, just watching the sunset, and make it feel like the most profound event in the world. He taught me that the value of a thing is not in its price, but in its story. And this house was our greatest story. We bought it when we were just married, a rambling old farmhouse with good bones and a lifetime of work ahead of it. Arthur didn't see the peeling paint or the drafty windows. He saw the history. He saw the generations of families who had lived and loved within these walls. He called it Willow Creek House, after the little creek that runs along the back of the property. For 50 years, we filled this house with our own story. We raised our son, Robert, here. Arthur built the tire swing that still hangs from the old oak tree in the backyard. I planted the rose bushes that climbed the trellis on the front porch, one for every anniversary. Every scuff on the floor, every chipped teacup in the cupboard, was a sentence in the novel of our life. It was a house built not just of wood and nails, but of love and memory. And when our granddaughter, Lily, was born, she became the most beautiful new chapter. Oh, that little girl. She was my shadow. From the time she could walk, she was fascinated by my sewing room. It was my sanctuary, a room filled with colorful fabrics, spools of thread, and my big, sturdy quilting frame. To Lily, it was a magical kingdom. She would sit at my feet for hours, her eyes wide with wonder, as I stitched together scraps of fabric, turning forgotten remnants into something warm and beautiful. "Tell me the story of this one, Grandma," she'd say, her little finger pointing to a square of faded blue fabric. And I would tell her, "Well, this little blue piece, this was from your daddy's first baby blanket. And this yellow calico, this was from the dress I wore on my first date with Grandpa Arthur. And this tiny piece of lace, this was from my wedding veil. Maybe I came soon." She understood, even as a little girl. She knew that a quilt wasn't just a blanket. It was a book. It was a map of a life. It was a story you could wrap yourself in. I made her a quilt for her 5th birthday, and she treasured it. She called it her story blanket and wouldn't sleep without it. For years, she was a child who understood the value of things that had no price tag. The change was slow. So slow, in fact, that at first I mistook it for growing up. It started when she went away to college in a big city and met Tristan. Tristan was, I must admit, a very charming young man. He was handsome, polite, and wildly ambitious. He came from what people call new money. His family had built a tech empire, and their world was one of sleek, minimalist design, of brand names and luxury, and the relentless pursuit of the next big thing. They were not people who cherished old, chipped teacups. They were people who replaced them. When Lily brought Tristan to Willow Creek House for the first time, I saw our home through his eyes. He was perfectly courteous, of course. "This is an incredible property, Josephine," he said, his eyes scanning the wide green lawn, the old barn, the rolling hills beyond. "The potential here is off the charts. What a magnificent backdrop for events." He didn't see a home. He saw a venue. He didn't see the history. He saw the potential for profit. He looked at Arthur's handcrafted bookshelves and complimented the rustic aesthetic. He saw my vegetable garden and talked about what a great spot it would be for a farm-to-table themed cocktail hour. He was a man who saw the world as a series of Instagrammable moments. And Lily, my sweet, story-loving Lily, she began to see it that way too. She started to look at her childhood home with his eyes. The cozy, comfortable clutter I had always loved became dated. The warm, lived-in feel became something that needed to be updated and streamlined. My son, Robert, her father, was caught in the middle. He was so proud of Lily, so impressed by her ambitious fiancé and his wealthy family, that he couldn't see what was happening. He just wanted his daughter to be happy. He became a passive, smiling accomplice in the slow, quiet erosion of our family's soul. When Lily and Tristan announced their engagement, their first and only thought for a wedding location was Willow Creek House. "Grandma, it's perfect," Lily gushed, her eyes shining with an excitement that felt different from her childhood joy. It was brighter, harder. The backyard under the old oak tree for the ceremony, the reception on the lawn. It will be the most beautiful wedding anyone has ever seen. Tristan's parents are willing to pay for everything, and they want it to be an absolute fairy tale. I was happy for her, of course, but a small, cold knot of dread began to form in my stomach. A fairy tale wedding. I had a feeling my kind of fairy tale and their kind of fairy tale were two very different stories. And so, for her engagement gift, I decided to make her the most important quilt of my life. Her wedding quilt. For a year, I poured my heart and soul into it. I found a piece of Arthur's favorite tweed jacket, a scrap from my son's graduation gown, a bit of silk from a dress Lily had worn to her first dance. I stitched in the story of her life, of our family. I embroidered their names and the date of their wedding in gold thread. Every single stitch was a prayer. Every knot was a wish for her happiness. It was, I knew, the finest, most meaningful thing I had ever made. It was a story she could start her own new life with. A story to keep her warm when the world felt cold. I thought it would be the one thing that would remind her of who she was, of where she came from. I thought it would be the gift that would bring my real granddaughter back to me. I was so wrong. The wedding planning descended upon Willow Creek House, not like a happy family project, but like a corporate takeover. Lily and Tristan, along with a sleek, impossibly thin wedding planner from the city named Genevieve, would arrive on weekends. My quiet, peaceful home was transformed into their headquarters. They didn't ask, they informed. They didn't consult, they commanded. Little by little, I began to feel like the unpaid, live-in staff of a historic event venue. The first casualty was my garden. My beautiful, chaotic English cottage garden, a riot of color and life that I had cultivated with Arthur for 50 years, was not up to their standards. Genevieve, the planner, walked through it one morning, a clipboard in hand, a look of clinical distaste on her face. "All right," she said, her voice echoing in the morning quiet. "All of this has to go." I felt a jolt, as if she'd struck me. "Go." "And what do you mean, go?" "And retotime." "The aesthetic for the wedding is minimalist, rustic elegance," she announced, as if reading from a script. "We'll be replacing all of this clutter with uniform beds of white hydrangeas and baby's breath. And we need to rip out that vegetable patch That's where the caterer's tent is going. My vegetable patch. My beautiful tomatoes and cucumbers. My rows of sweet peas and lettuces. The garden that fed me. The garden where I still felt closest to Arthur. She spoke of ripping it out as if it were an old, stained carpet. I looked at Lily, my heart pleading. Say something. This is our garden. Remember planting pumpkin seeds here with Grandpa? It's. Lily just gave me a tight, apologetic smile, the one that was becoming her default expression around me. Grandma, it's just for the wedding. It will look so much more sophisticated. Genevieve has a vision. Sophisticated. My life's work, my joy, was unsophisticated. It was a weed to be pulled to make way for their perfect, sterile, white floral arrangement. My son, Robert, was there that day. He just stood by, hands in his pockets, and said, "Whatever makes you happy, Pumpkin." He was so blinded by his daughter's happiness, so intimidated by Tristan's wealth, that he was willing to let them pave over paradise to put up a catering tent. The house itself became the next target. My comfortable worn furniture was deemed unsuitable for the reception. Truckloads of rented furniture began to arrive. Sleek, modern couches, ghost-like acrylic chairs, and tall, impersonal cocktail tables. My home was being hollowed out, its warm, familiar heart replaced with the cold, temporary glamour of a hotel lobby. I would come downstairs and find strangers, moving the armchair Arthur had died in, draping it in a sheet, and hauling it off to storage. Each piece of my life they removed felt like a small death. I felt a profound, suffocating sense of erasure. I was no longer the matriarch of this home. I was a relic, a piece of the authentic scenery that had to be carefully managed. Lily and Tristan would talk about their plans in front of me as if I weren't there, or worse, as if I were a slightly senile old woman who couldn't possibly have an opinion worth considering. "We'll need to have your things moved out of the master bedroom for the week of the wedding, Grandma," Lily said casually one afternoon, scrolling through something on her phone. "We're using it as the bridal suite for me and my bridesmaids to get ready." She was kicking me out of my own bedroom, the room I had shared with my husband for 50 years. The room where I still kept his book on the bedside table, a silent testament to our life together. And she said it with the same casual tone she might use to ask me to pass the salt. My voice was a hoarse whisper. Where am I supposed to sleep, Lily?" "Oh, we'll set up a cot for you in the sewing room," she said brightly, still not looking up from her phone. "It'll be fun, like a little camp out." A cot. In my own house. While she and her friends took over my bedroom, my sanctuary. The humiliation was so profound it stole the air from my lungs. The sewing room, the place where I had created so much beauty, was to become my temporary prison cell. Was it my fault? The question was a constant, tormenting drumbeat in my head. Had I spoiled her? Had I not taught her the lessons of her grandfather? The lessons of the heart? Or had the allure of Tristan's shiny, new world simply been too powerful? Was I just an old woman, clinging to a past that had no value in their currency of brand names and bottom lines? Through it all, I kept my secret. I kept working on the quilt. It became my refuge. In the evenings, after the planners and the florists and the caterers had finally left, I would retreat to my sewing room. I would sit at my quilting frame, the colored scraps of fabric spread around me like old friends, and I would stitch. With every tiny, perfect stitch, I poured my love, my memories, and my hopes for her into that quilt. I told myself that this would be the thing that would break the spell. When she saw it, when she felt the weight of her own history in her hands, she would remember. She would remember the little girl who loved stories. She would remember me. The day of her bridal shower arrived. It was to be held at the house, a grand, catered affair. Lily had made it very clear that this was my moment to give her my gift. "All the other gifts will be from the registry, of course," she'd said. "But yours is the special one, the sentimental one. Everyone is so excited to see what you've made." The pressure was immense. My quilt was to be the centerpiece of the gift opening, the one moment of authentic, rustic charm in an afternoon of expensive, store-bought luxury. The house was filled with women I didn't know. They were all beautiful, all dressed in expensive floral dresses, their laughter like the tinkling of tiny bells. I felt like a foreigner in my own home, a servant at their party. Finally, the moment came. Lily sat in a large throne-like chair, a mountain of beautifully wrapped presents at her feet. She opened them one by one, cooing with delight at the crystal vases, the silver platters, the high-tech kitchen gadgets. Then, she turned to me. "And now for the most special gift of all," she announced, her voice full of a practiced public affection. "From my Grandma Josephine." With trembling hands, I brought out the quilt. It was wrapped simply, in brown paper tied with a velvet ribbon. I had spent a year of my life on it. It was, without a doubt, the most beautiful thing I had ever created. She unwrapped it with a flourish, for the benefit of her audience. She held it up. The afternoon light from the window caught the colors, the intricate stitching, the gold thread of her name. It was a masterpiece of love. A polite collective ooh went through the room. Lily stared at it. She held it up, her perfectly manicured fingers pinching the corner. The smile on her face was frozen. It didn't reach her eyes. She looked at the carefully stitched squares of her father's baby blanket, of my wedding veil, of her grandfather's favorite shirt, and I saw with a dawning, soul-crushing horror that she didn't recognize any of them. They were just old scraps of fabric to her. She turned the quilt over in her hands. She felt the weight of it, and then she looked up, not at me, but at her maid of honor, who was sitting beside her. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shrug, a little wrinkle of her nose, and then she said the words. The 6 words that ended everything. She said them in a stage whisper, a conspiratorial murmur meant for her friend. But in the quiet, expectant room, everyone heard it. "This looks so cheap, Grandma," she said, her voice laced with a gentle, pitying disappointment. She tried to cover it with a laugh. It's very rustic. Thank you." Cheap. The word hung in the air, a poisoned dart. It struck me with a physical force. My heart, which had been pounding with nervous hope, seemed to just stop. The room went blurry. The sound of the polite, strained applause that followed was like the rushing of water in my ears. She thought it was cheap. This gift, which held the entire story of our family, the sum total of my love for her, was cheap. She held a lifetime of sacrifice in her hands and measured its worth in dollars and cents, and found it wanting. In that moment, I wasn't just heartbroken. I was liberated. The last, stubborn thread of hope I had been clinging to finally snapped. The little girl who loved stories was gone, and the woman who stood in her place was a stranger, a product of a world I didn't belong in and didn't want to. A cold, calm clarity descended upon me. The kind of clarity that comes after a devastating fire has burned everything to the ground. There is nothing left to save. There is only the truth of the ashes. I stood up. I didn't say a word. I walked over to my granddaughter, the stranger. I gently took the quilt from her hands. She let it go, a look of confused relief on her face. I folded it. My hands were steady. I folded the story of her father's childhood. I folded the memory of her grandfather's love. I folded my own heart. And then I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her sitting on her throne, surrounded by her expensive, meaningless gifts. I went upstairs to my sewing room, my temporary bedroom, and I laid the quilt on the cot. And I knew, with an absolute, unshakable certainty, what I had to do. Her fairy tale wedding was going to have a very different ending than the one she had planned. And I, the woman whose love she had just called cheap, was going to be the author of it. In the quiet of my sewing room, with the useless, beautiful quilt lying on the cot beside me, the grief came. It was a silent, storming thing, a physical ache in my chest for the granddaughter I had lost. But underneath the grief, something else was taking root. It was the cold, hard certainty of a decision. The love I had poured into that quilt, the love she had so casually dismissed, was not cheap. It was the most valuable thing I had, and she had just proven in front of a room full of witnesses that she was not worthy of it. And the house, Willow Creek House, it was the same thing. It was a quilt made of wood and nails, stitched together with my husband's love and my memories. They were treating it with the same casual, dismissive entitlement. They saw it as a backdrop, a venue, a piece of property whose value was in its appearance, not in its soul. They didn't deserve to start their story within the sacred pages of mine. In that moment, the last of my fear vanished. For months, I had been so afraid of making waves, of being the difficult old woman. I had been terrified of losing my son and my granddaughter. But the bridal shower had shown me the truth. I had already lost them. You cannot lose what is already gone. And in that realization, I found a strange and terrible freedom. My plan was not born of rage. It was born of clarity. It was not about revenge. It was about preservation. I was going to save my home. I was going to protect Arthur's legacy from their shallow, Instagrammable world. The week leading up to the wedding was a masterclass in quiet performance. I played my part to perfection. I was the sweet, slightly dotty, heartbroken grandmother. I was quiet. I was sad. I was accommodating. I allowed them to move me into the sewing room. I watched, without a word, as they dismantled my life and replaced it with their rented fantasy. They mistook my silence for surrender. They had no idea it was the calm before the storm. While they were tasting cakes and finalizing floral arrangements, I was making phone calls. My first call was to my nephew, a wonderful young man who, like his uncle Arthur, was a history teacher. He and his wife had 2 young children, and they were living in a cramped apartment, dreaming of a yard and a place with a story. "Michael," I said, my voice steady, "I have a proposition for you." My next call was to a lawyer. Not a fancy corporate lawyer like Tristan's father, but a tough, no-nonsense woman from my town who specialized in property and trusts. I explained the situation. I explained my plan. She listened, and then she let out a low whistle. "Josephine," she said, "this is the most beautifully brutal thing I have ever heard. I love it. Let's get to work." The wedding day arrived, a perfect sun-drenched Saturday in June. Willow Creek House had been transformed. It was breathtaking, I had to admit. White tents bloomed on the lawn. Thousands of white hydrangeas had replaced my beloved chaotic garden. A string quartet was playing softly on the porch. It was a perfect, soulless fairy tale. I moved through the day like an actress in a play. I smiled. I made small talk. I let Lily and Tristan and Genevieve, the planner, direct me and position me as they saw fit. I was the perfect, harmless, sentimental old propte. The ceremony was held under the old oak tree. Lily was a stunning bride. Tristan was a handsome groom. They said their vows, promising to love and honor each other, and all I could think about was the profound dishonor they had shown to me and to the memory of my husband. The reception began. The guests, all of them wealthy and beautiful, sipped champagne on the lawn where Lily had taken her first steps. They danced in a tent set up over the patch of earth where Arthur and I had planted our first vegetable garden. They were celebrating their future on the grave of my past. My moment came, as I had planned during the speeches. First, Tristan's father stood up. He gave a long, pompous speech about business and success and welcoming Lily into their family of high achievers. Then my son, Robert, stood up. He gave a sweet, sentimental speech about his little girl, about watching her grow up in this very house. He talked about how wonderful it was that she was starting her own new chapter, right here, at Willow Creek. "This house," he said, his voice thick with emotion as he raised his glass, "is not just a house. It is the heart of our family, and now it is the foundation for a new one. To Lily and Tristan and to the future of Willow Creek House." All the guests cheered and drank. Lily and Tristan beamed, their faces shining with the smug, happy glow of ownership. They looked at me and smiled, a gracious, benevolent smile. The smile of a king and queen looking at one of their loyal, harmless subjects. And then it was my turn. Genevieve, the planner, had not scheduled me to speak. Of course not. My rustic, unvetted opinions were not part of the program. But I had arranged it with the band leader beforehand. I walked to the microphone. A little hush fell over the crowd. I was not on the schedule. This was a surprise. I looked out at the sea of faces. I saw my son. I saw Tristan and his parents. And I saw Lily, my beautiful stranger of a granddaughter, looking at me with a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. "What is Grandma doing?" "Whoa, me." "Hello, everyone," I began, my voice clear and strong, amplified by the microphone. "For those of you who don't know me, my name is Josephine, and I am the grandmother of the bride. The owner. The former owner, I should say, of this beautiful house." A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. Former owner? Endertungen. I saw Lily and Tristan exchange a panicked look. My son, Robert, looked utterly bewildered. "My husband, Arthur, and I built our life in this house," I continued, my gaze sweeping across the crowd and landing on Lily. "We filled it with love, with memories, and with stories. I thought for a long time that this house would be my granddaughter's legacy, a place for her to start her own family, wrapped in the warmth of her own history." I paused. I let the sentimental words hang in the air. But a few weeks ago, at her bridal shower, I gave Lily another gift, a quilt I had spent a year making for her, a story blanket stitched with pieces of her past, her father's baby blanket, her grandfather's favorite shirt, a piece of my own wedding veil. It was a gift of love, a gift of history, and my granddaughter, in her wisdom, looked at this gift and declared it to be Chep. A collective, sharp intake of breath. I saw Lily's face go from annoyed to ashen. The word, spoken so loudly, so publicly, was a slap. And in that moment, I said, my voice ringing with a terrible, calm clarity, "I realize that you cannot give a gift of history to someone who does not value it. You cannot give a home built of memories to people who only see it as a venue, as a backdrop for their sophisticated life. This house, Willow Creek House, it is not cheap. Its value cannot be measured in dollars and cents, and it deserves to be owned by people who understand." I saw the dawning horror on Tristan's face. I saw his father's eyes narrow. I saw my son rise halfway out of his chair, his face a mask of disbelief. This was my fight back. Not with a shout, but with a story. My story. "So, I would like to make an announcement," I said, my voice bright and cheerful. "As my wedding gift to Lily and Tristan, I have decided to give them exactly what they deserve. I have given them the wedding of their dreams in this beautiful setting they so admired. And as of this morning, I have given the house itself, lock, stock, and barrel, to my nephew, Michael, and his family, who I know will cherish its stories for generations to come." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a silence so profound, so complete, that I could hear the sound of a single champagne glass slipping from someone's hand and shattering on the floor. "The deed was signed yesterday," I said, my voice dropping slightly, now speaking directly to Lily and Tristan. "The new owners will be taking possession next Friday. I do hope you'll have all this rented furniture removed by then. My nephew's children are very excited to use the tire swing again." I looked at my granddaughter. Her face was a ruin. The perfect bride, the fairy tale princess, was gone. In her place was a girl who was finally, devastatingly, understanding the true cost of the word cheap. "So let us all raise a glass," I said, picking up my water goblet. "To the happy couple, Lily and Tristan. May your marriage be filled with all the expensive, modern, and brand new things your hearts desire. And to my nephew Michael and his wife Sarah, welcome home." I took a sip of my water. I placed the microphone back on its stand. And I walked away from the head table, away from the wreckage of their perfect fairy tale. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't cried. I had simply told the truth. I had told a story. And it had been more powerful and more destructive than any bomb. The wedding didn't just end, it imploded. My announcement was a grenade tossed into the middle of their perfectly curated fairy tale, and the shrapnel of truth hit everyone. The string quartet faltered into a discordant silence. The guests, who moments before had been celebrating a union, were now frozen, staring at the head table as if it were a car crash. I didn't stay to watch the chaos unfold. I had said my piece. I simply walked through the stunned crowd, a quiet old woman in a simple dress who had just dismantled a dynasty with a story. I saw my son, Robert, pushing his way through the guests towards me, his face a maelstrom of confusion and anguish. "Mom, what have you done?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I've saved your father's house, Robert," I said calmly. "And I've given your daughter a lesson in value. It's a lesson she is long overdue." I didn't wait for his response. I walked out of the tent, across the lawn that was no longer mine to worry about, and into the house. I went up to my sewing room, my little temporary bedroom, and I packed my small overnight bag. I took the quilt, my beautiful rejected quilt, and folded it carefully. It would be a gift for my nephew's daughter, a girl who I knew would learn its stories by heart. The sound of shouting began to drift up from the backyard. I could hear Tristan's voice, sharp and furious. I could hear his father bellowing. I could hear Lily, not shouting, but sobbing, the high, thin wail of a princess whose castle had just been turned back into a pumpkin. Their fairy tale was over. My nephew, Michael, and his wife, Sarah, who had been waiting discreetly at a neighbor's house, arrived about an hour later. I met them at the front door. The look on their faces was a mixture of awe, gratitude, and a little bit of terror. "Aunt Josephine," Michael said, his voice full of emotion. We don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," I said, handing him the old iron key to the front door. "Just be happy here. Just fill these walls with love and stories. That's all your Uncle Arthur would have wanted." I left before the last of the guests had even fled. I got into my car and drove away from Willow Creek House without a single look back. I wasn't leaving my home. I was liberating it. The aftermath, as you can imagine, was messy. My son and my granddaughter, of course, were furious. I received a barrage of phone calls, a flurry of texts filled with rage and disbelief. They accused me of being cruel, of being vengeful, of humiliating them. Tristan's family, the high-powered tech moguls, tried to fight it. Their lawyers sent threatening letters, talking about verbal agreements and emotional distress. But my lawyer, the tough, no-nonsense woman from town, shut them down with ruthless efficiency. The house was mine to give, and I had given it. There was nothing they could do. The marriage, built on a foundation of social climbing and future real estate acquisitions, barely lasted 6 months. Without the magnificent backdrop of Willow Creek House to launch their life as a power couple, their union apparently lost its purpose. Tristan's family, I heard, saw Lily not as a goddess anymore, but as the girl who had fumbled a multi-million-dollar property. She was no longer an asset. She was a liability. And my son, Robert? Our relationship is fractured. He eventually understood, on some level, why I had done it. But he could never forgive the public nature of it, the humiliation his daughter had suffered. He is a man caught between a daughter he spoiled and a mother he allowed to be disrespected. The silence between us now is heavy with all the things he failed to say when it mattered. But I have no regrets. Not a single one. I moved into a small, lovely cottage in a retirement community an hour away. It's a place filled with people who have their own stories. I spend my days quilting, not with the ghosts of the past, but for the joy of it. I teach a quilting class. I tell the women in my class that every scrap of fabric has a story, and no story is cheap. My nephew Michael and his family are thriving at Willow Creek House. He sends me pictures of his children playing on the tire swing, of his wife tending my old rose bushes. The house is alive again, filled with the sounds of a family that knows its value is not in its appearance, but in its heart. That is the only legacy Arthur and I are wanted. The lesson I learned is one stitched into the very fabric of my life. Value is a tricky thing. Some people, like my granddaughter, are taught that value is something you buy. It's the price tag, the brand name, the shiny new thing that impresses the world. But real value, the kind that lasts, is something you build. It's built with love, and with sacrifice, and with time. It's the story of a hand-carved banister, the memory in a faded piece of cloth, the quiet dignity of a life well lived. You cannot give something of real value to people who only understand price. To do so is a heartbreak. The greatest gift you can give your children and grandchildren is not the beautiful things you own, but the wisdom to see the beauty in things that cannot be owned. And sometimes, the most loving act of all is to protect your treasures from those who are not yet wise enough to cherish them. Thank you so much for letting me share this story. It feels like I've finally folded up a painful memory and put it away for good. If my story touched your heart, I would be so grateful if you would like this video and subscribe to our channel so we can continue to share these moments together. Please, don't forget to ring that notification bell. The comment section is our own little quilting circle, so please, feel free to share your own stories of what you value most. Every story adds another beautiful square to our community. Love you all. This is Grandma Josephine, and I'll see you in the next story.